And so we made it through 31 days of Draw Everyday May, and I really enjoyed it. I feel I started with a list of things that I was going to show you or take you to via the video, and different sort of techniques and experiments in a very organised way. However, I found that once we got going with a few of the things we did, it inspired other possibilities. So we've collaged, we've done observational drawing, we've printed on a jelly plate, we've created lots of imagery, lots of references based in sometimes real life, sometimes mixed with imagination, and using different materials and techniques to kind of get a sense of what works best to tell the story. Now, I know many of you enjoyed the printing on the jelly plate, and there's been a request to have a bit more of a lesson on that, and I thought it would be useful if I shared with you typically what I use. Now, there's so many different ways in which you can use a jelly plate, and you'll see a lot of like YouTubers using it to transfer photos and colour photos, whereas I tend to use it as a abstract start, or to make collage paper, or even to create characters and shapes. And I use it in a very direct way, which you will have seen throughout May, but for June, I'm going to show you a few different ways and just break it down a little bit for you and show you what materials I think are useful. Now, when I am applying acrylic paint to the jelly plate, I typically use a roller or a brayer. And that means I can get an even application and also very, very thin. And it's the thin that matters, because if you get too thick and then push a piece of paper onto the jelly plate, you're actually squishing and losing your print detail, whether it's leaves or whatever you've drawn. The paint will just squish. So thick will give you a colour result rather than a illustration result. So I tend to use it in a very thin way, and this tool really helps me do that. And I kind of like layering up and mixing it on the jelly plate as well. And you'll see me apply it directly to the jelly plate in this case, because if I had my paint on a palette, you wouldn't be able to get a sense of how much paint I'm using. And today I've just kept it simple just for this example. I just used a cheap acrylic paint, which this one's quite opaque, and then I used an expensive acrylic paint, but it's open. And this Golden brand, they designed this open acrylic, which means it's slow drying, and that just gives you a wee bit longer on the jelly plate before it's all dried. But if your jelly plate dries before you've managed to pull it, there's a couple of things you can do. You can use matte medium, which is actually acrylic without colour. It dries translucent, and you can get a gloss medium as well. And this kind of soaks into the dried acrylic layer on the jelly plate and helps you pull it off. So that's quite handy to have in your kit. If you haven't got that, you could always add a layer of white if your jelly plate is dried, and that would do a similar thing. The only difference between these two things, this has white as a colour pigment and this is translucent see-through. So if you don't mind having a white background, white paint will work perfectly. If you want to see through to the paper you're using, and you might be using pre-printed paper, pre-coloured paper, an abstract start, all sorts of things, and you want to see through to that, then this is the fella to have. Of course, having both gives you options. So that's acrylic white paint, matte medium acrylic, a roller. You can use open paint, and if you don't use open paint, you can use ordinary paint, and then these two will help you along. So I also have the trusted wet wipes at hand, one for wiping away on the plate, or two cleaning the brayer and just having it to hand. You'll see also that I use a clay shaper, and this is to scrape back shapes and draw into the wet paint on the jelly plate. I also do that with a wet wipe. You can use all sorts of different tools to make marks. I haven't pulled out everything that I make marks with, but you know me, I'm always trying to find different ways of finding marks, and I've got lots and lots of different tools, different textures, different materials, even kitchen roll. I get fussy with the pattern that's on the kitchen roll because potentially I could print with that. I didn't use it today, but the wipe away method, as I did with the wet wipe, you can also use earbuds for smaller areas, so that's always handy. You'll see me cutting a stencil from paper and blocking away a character. In fact, let me show you. He's in here now. Stuck him in the sketchbook somewhere. So I cut this out of newsprint, and newsprint or printer paper, photocopy paper, any cheap paper. Poundland do pads of it, and it's super cheap in there. The cheaper the paper, I always find the better the pull. So try not to use anything too heavy. Cartridge paper doesn't really work very well. Sometimes and you'll see this in the video, I'll experiment with using tracing paper. I didn't really like this particular effect, but I reckon that could be a collage at some point. So it's worth keeping all of these experiments. Sometimes I print on deli paper, which is, you know, what you might wrap your sandwiches in. And again, it's super thin. The only trouble with the deli paper, sometimes it's kind of got like a waxy layer to it. So if you're wanting to draw on top after you've pulled the print, you'll get quite a lot of resist. But then that might make for interesting results as well. I also printed on. I save both the front and back of every sketchbook I have. The back is a grey board, and it's super useful for making dummy books for university. And then the front, this shiny paper, this gives interesting effects as well. So here on this one, I've rolled onto the jelly plate, and then I've got the wet wipe, and I've wiped away my character. And I love the residue marks that it leaves, and it makes it look interesting with very, very little effort. So sometimes your cheap, scrappy bits of paper work brilliantly, and you could even print on newspaper as well. But my favourite paper is newsprint. And newsprint is very thin, and it's what newspapers are printed on. Normally, it's got like an oatmeal colour to it, but this one it's a lot lighter. I prefer the oatmeal colour personally, but I got a stack of this, so it was worth experimenting with it, and I really liked what it did. First of all, sorry, I'm just reaching all the different bits I've done. So I'll keep all scraps of paper. So I've got like this, here's the oatmeal version. I've got this ripped scrap of paper, which again, I can use as collage. And I've printed onto that. And I just love the fragility of this paper. I like that it's got a bit of a shine, and actually it's got 0 tooth, so I can't overwork this. If I were to sort of come in with colour pencils or inks and paints on top of this, it won't actually hold very much, and that restriction helps me a lot so I don't overload the image that I'm working on. But I did a double pull on this one. I think I did blue first of all, and then I came in with the magenta. And I've been using a stencil here. This is the stencil, and I've used the stencil both ways, and I've played with roller the paint onto the jelly plate, then place the stencil on the jelly plate, then get a wet wipe and wipe away through the stencil. Now, of course, because you're placing this down on the jelly plate, you will get a sense of that plastic sheet being on the jelly plate, which you can see a kind of ghost there. But you can soften that, and if you're doing a double or a triple or a quadruple, however many layers, it will disappear within those layers as well. But I just love how you get some really interesting effects of colour crossover on this. And I just want to show you my jelly plate. I've got two. I've got this really old, gnarly one, which has got lumps and bumps and chips out of it. It's very old, but very trusted and makes brilliant textures. I keep them in their container that they come in, and I keep them flat. It's very important to keep them flat, and you don't want anything stacked on top of it because it will indent the jelly plate. And the one I've been using today, this one isn't as old, but it's starting to earn its scars. I actually like to put the jelly plate on a plastic sheet of Perspex because that allows me to lift it up and out of the way really easily, rather than trying to peel it off and get paint all over. Like, I worry about getting paint over my hands. What am I worrying about? I'm worrying about wiping paint off the actual image and disrupting the image. Don't mind getting messy hands. So if you were doing that, you would potentially do some damage to the image you're creating if you're wanting to move it for any reason. So it's easy if you pop it on a piece of Perspex and it acts like a tray, and you can just lift it up and move it out of the way, nice and easy. I used to have some A5 jelly plates, and they were so handy for doing very quick experiments. If I had 5 minutes, I would actually put them directly on my sketchbook. And the way I'm showing you today is I've got the jelly plate and I'm working on top of the jelly plate, but with a smaller jelly plate you can actually work in reverse and almost sandwich it down. But I shan't confuse you with that, and I don't have my small ones anymore. I need to treat myself to some. And I think you can get some interesting shaped ones, like some ovals, some circles, and they just offer different ways into your creativity. And there's 1,000,001 ways you can use this jelly plate. Very often you see on the internet lots of people doing photo transfers, and that's kind of not how I use them. You will find your own way of using them, but the trick is to experiment to find your way. Okay, so I've mentioned this one on a scrap piece of paper, and I love how this effect kind of resists and leaves a little residue. And then I also did a charcoal transfer, so you could actually draw on a piece of paper with charcoal. You could even use stencils and be quite elaborate. I've done something relatively straightforward and simple today just to show you. And then you can print that onto paper, and you can obviously layer up some interesting textures on the background as well. So that's another consideration. And my favourite way of working is kind of thinking about things in positive and negative and their shapes. So here, once you get to this stage in the video, you'll see me cut out this fella, which as you've seen, he's now in the sketchbook. Let me just get him again. Oh, I swear I need a bigger table. So this is the cut out piece of paper. Now what you've got to remember is when you're printing on the jelly plate, everything's in reverse. So if that's important to you, you need to consider drawing it backwards so it prints the right way for you. And then I just loved how this heron looked like he's sneaking off. And then I thought, oh, maybe the birds could be following it. And I really like that composition. I love the textured background. It could be that some of these shapes are all a bit too harsh, a bit too clean, a bit too obvious, but I know how to knock that back. And this gives me an opportunity to save the negative space, which we've kind of chatted about throughout 31 days of Drawing Everyday May, about how important that negative space is, because it immediately leads your eye there. And I've had a good bit of serendipity here where the print hasn't picked up anything and it kind of leads your eye into the character. So I think I'm going to pop that into my sketchbook and work into it and see where it takes me, as I will with this one as well. So you've got a number of ways of thinking about how you might use the jelly plate, but my top tips are: apply a thin layer with your roller. Don't be afraid of pulling one layer, thinking about it, and then putting that same piece of paper back on the jelly plate to pull another layer. And the thinking is in the doing, so you've definitely got to feel this process to know what it is that you like about it. I quite early on decided the photo transfer route wasn't for me, but trying to find a way in which I could create atmosphere with the jelly plate but still retain strong shapes for characters became important, and I experimented with lots of stencils and protecting areas. And of course I can draw into these and bring the character out a bit more. Your matte medium is great for pulling something that has been dried and giving you a translucent base. If you've not got that, you can try acrylic white paint. And I say white paint because most paper is white, so that will give you the illusion of the white paper underneath your print. And if you're treating yourself to open paint for slow drying acrylics, these are golden, are usually a wee bit more expensive than, you know, your bog standard acrylic paint, but the quality is good, the pigment is good, and the slow drying can be useful. But if you're not treating yourself, just play and maybe experimenting with the cheaper stuff first gives you a bit of confidence using the materials before you then go on to the more expensive stuff. So you're going to see a video now of me applying the different methods and applications of paint or stencil or wipe away. When you're using a stencil as a mask, or whether you're wiping away with tissue or earbud or wet wipe, that's kind of a reductive way of working. You're kind of reducing those elements, and you've sometimes got to think ahead. But I don't want you to stall in experimenting first by thinking you've got to plan everything in advance. It's almost, I reckon, the best way to do it is pull some pages without thinking, see what it does, get a sense of the material, and then start to plan and respond to what's happening. And that is, I think, the most satisfying way forward. And those of you who've done this one or this one or this one or this one will get a sense of how satisfying it is to work in that way. Okay, so I'll pop some music on. I'll play the doing of the jelly plate in real time, just so you can see exactly what I'm doing, how long it's taking me. I won't talk over it. I'll let you get a sense of what I'm doing just by watching. If watching it in real time is a bit of a pain, if you go to the bottom right hand corner when the video is playing and click on settings, you can change the playback speed and make it a wee bit faster. Maybe turn the music down at that point because it might get a bit annoying for your ears, but you can watch it in a time-lapse way then. So I'm going to play that, and then I'm also going to work into this in my sketchbook.
aside, lead the way on this trial. If you don't know the way, we can stop and make a change. I know we walk for days, losing hope, fading love. This night will be okay, waking up to another day. Someday I know we're going somewhere, into the danger zone. It all points right to that. I set myself aside, lead the way on this trial. If you don't know the way, we can stop and make a change.